The Trade Minister has this morning accused Beijing of undermining the letter and spirit of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement as diplomatic relations between the two countries continue to sour. Simon Birmingham has given a speech to Parliament reflecting on the deal that was signed in 2015, saying the government is increasingly concerned about a series of trade issues with products including barley, beef and wine. Our political reporter Stephanie Boris joins me now from Parliament House. Steph, we saw Simon Birmingham hop up in the last half an hour or so. Why has he given this speech to Parliament, and what exactly did he have to say about the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement?
In order to understand a little bit of the context around this, we need to go back to last week when the Senate passed a motion asking essentially the Trade Minister to stand up in Parliament and explain the government's assessment of the free trade deal between China and Australia. We do know obviously that it is very much on rocky grounds at the moment because there have been a number of Australian products that either haven't been able to get into China or have been had heavy or large tariffs placed on them, such as barley and wine. Now, China says that the problems with this are due to product issues, but this really, when it's all said and done, is a political issue, and that's what the Trade Minister went to today in his speech to Parliament, saying that he's increasingly concerned about a series of disruptive and restrictive measures on Australian goods and services, and there's been a lack of engagement on the Chinese government's part in terms of trying to sort these issues out. Let's take a listen to what the Trade Minister said a short time ago.
In the view of the Australian Government, the targeted nature of Chinese government measures on Australian goods raises concerns about China's adherence to the letter and spirit of both its CHAFTA and its WTO obligations. Australia has raised these concerns with Chinese officials on multiple occasions in both Canberra and in Beijing, and has asked the Chinese government to engage on these matters at officials and ministerial levels. The Chinese government has consistently spoken about its commitment to open trade and the multilateral trading system, as well as to its free trade agreements, including CHAFTA. All WTO members are expected to conduct their trading relationships in a manner consistent with their international obligations. We have raised our concerns about the Chinese government's measures in the WTO, including most recently at the 25 November 2020 meeting of the WTO Committee on Trade in Goods. We raised at that committee our concerns in respect to barley, to wine, meat and dairy establishments, live seafood exports, logs, timber, coal and cotton. Only yesterday, the Chinese government, through its customs agency, the General Administration of Customs of the PRC, notified Australian agricultural officials of a further suspension of a meat processing facility, Merrimast, in Caboolture. The Australian government has raised its concerns with the Chinese government's anti-dumping and countervailing duties investigations into imports of Australian barley, and has expressed our view that the Chinese government's processes, analysis and findings were inconsistent with WTO rules.
Steffi, on another matter now, the government is introducing legislation to Parliament today that will shake up industrial relations laws. What do we know about it?
So there are a number of changes taking place as a result of the government speaking with unions and businesses about what differences need to be made to the industrial relations laws in order to maintain and live up to modern day situations, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, what we've learnt is the government wants to make changes to the Better Off Overall test, and that's a tool used when negotiating enterprise agreements. The name basically gives it away. So it means no employee can be worse off under a new enterprise agreement than they would be under the award. Now, the government wants to expand that exemption, so saying that businesses have done it really tough during COVID-19, and if they're still struggling, they need to be able to go to the Fair Work Commissioner and ask if potentially the pay or conditions of some workers could be reduced in order to ensure that the business is viable into the future. Now, unions argue that this is a terrible idea because it means some workers will be worse off. But the Attorney-General, Christian Porter, doesn't believe it will be used widely, and says further to that, it will only be used when extremely necessary.
We're slightly extending an existing exemption that has already existed for many years in the Fair Work Act to have what we think will be very rarely used ability of the independent umpire to approve some agreements that might not tick every technical and legal box, if that's necessary, and it's agreed to be necessary between employer and employee for the business to survive in the next 2 years during COVID.
So this legislation is being introduced into Parliament today. Aside from the Better Off Overall test, there are proposed changes to casuals whereby then they can become permanent workers, and also allowing part-time workers to take on more hours, but they won't be offered additional penalty rates.
Stephanie Boris in Canberra for us this morning.